Welcome to FPTV New Releases, and welcome to our very special guest, Alex Myers, the author of The Story of Silence, for which we have, in the words of my colleague, the mighty Laura Dodd right here, a stunning FP exclusive signed edition with a sprayed edge that you can actually order from the link attached to this interview. How are you doing, Alex?
Doing well, thank you.
That's great to see you, mate. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
As we were talking about just before we started filming, Laura is a huge fan of your work, and I know has a battalion of questions for you. So over to you, Laura.
Yeah. So for anyone who hasn't read or hasn't heard of The Story of Silence, what can you tell us about it?
Unbiased, of course. It's completely fantastic.
Indeed,
but,
indeed.
Beyond that, it's based on a 13th century French poem, a romance, that I first read in a medieval studies seminar that I took as an English graduate student. And I'm utterly delighted that I turned it into a fantasy novel, because when I read the original poem, it had all the elements of fantasy, but in this really weird and archaic form. But there's Merlin in there, and there's nature and nurture, and of course there is silence. So it was a delight to find, and then a real fun thing to rewrite.
So what captured your imagination? Was it the whole thing? Was it the language, or was it kind of the idea of the story from the traditional French legend?
It was very much the story and the way it was set up. I was immediately intrigued that in the 13th century, they were talking about the difference between what to me I would describe as biological sex and gender expression, that they were talking about that in terms of nature and nurture as something that was inherent versus something that was imposed. And I just kept reading it thinking, this must be a hoax. Like, this must be something written in the 20th or 21st century that somebody has pretended is otherwise. So it was that aspect of Silence being born a girl, but then their parent just decides to raise them as a boy. And just experiencing that plot line completely enchanted me.
Yeah, it is wonderful. There's something about the kind of medieval setting as well. Like, I was kind of comparing it a bit to kind of the Alana series by Tamora Pierce and things like that, that just so rich in detail.
Yeah, medieval, like vaguely medieval, and then vaguely Arthurian, because you've got Merlin in there, but it's not the Merlin that we know from the Knights of the Round Table. He's not the wise wizard in the fancy robes who floats in and solves problems. He's old, he's bedraggled, he's quite possibly insane, and Silence hauls him out of the woods and rather reluctantly subjects themselves to Merlin's magic, and it's kind of a perverse sort of magic. He doesn't always do good things, though he keeps insisting he's doing the right thing. So that too, I extended it and elaborated it for my novel. But in the original, he's there as a dirty naked old man. So.
Wow. I mean, that does it. So. The settings for The Story of Silence, so we go between kind of Cornwall and then Burgundy. Have you had a chance to visit these places yourself, or?
Never. I would love to. I'm not entirely sure the original author visited the places either. So things like how long it takes to get from Cornwall to Winchester, they sort of go there in a day or so.
That's back then. That absolutely was not possible.
Right, possibly even now.
Yeah, correct.
So yeah, and so I had blithely just wrote it that way and keeping it true to the original, and my editor was like, no. So I was like, okay. So there's a lot that's clearly inaccurate, but there's also a lot where they get the sensibility of Cornwall being a sort of end of the world and being a sort of out there place, and France being a land of great difference to that, and a place where Silence is able to reinvent himself. I think because it was, foreign and other in that way.
It does have a bit of a feel as well. Like, I've recently, a friend of mine did a reimagining of the Tristan and Isolde Cornish kind of folklore and fairy tale, and it does kind of. Are you familiar with that as well? Like, I'm sure in your studies.
Familiar with the original, yeah, not with this revision that you're talking about, but yes.
I shall send you links. She's done an absolutely wonderful job. She did a trilogy of books with Imprint in the US, who have actually, unfortunately, recently, due to COVID and stuff, as one of the publishers that I think is no longer around. But yeah, it was a wonderful kind of retelling. So yeah, definitely worth checking.
Oh wow. Laura, I'd love to read that as well. My dissertation for my degree was on Arthurian literature, so I'm a big fan. So I would love to read that.
Yeah, I may have a few reading copies hanging around my room. So I'm not her agent, but passing out books. So Alex, what are your kind of favourite books and films that deal with similar issues of gender and identity?
So many. So I think the one that for me, I'm a transgender guy, and the one that for me kind of hit a spot that really resonated, probably is now a little bit dated, Boys Don't Cry, which is the Brandon Tina story. And I remember watching it, and even though Brandon Tina in that is played by a cisgender woman, it was the first time I saw a person who looked like me on screen. And there's something about having that representation that was really powerful. So even though I think if I watched it now, I'd be like, ooh, again, I don't think it's aged particularly well, like me. Then I think I would still like it for that. It's kind of iconic. And a favorite book on this topic. I would have to go with nonfiction, and I'd actually have to go with a wonderful book called Redressing the Past, about the opening of the American frontier and gender there. It blew my mind. I had never really thought about people who lived lives in other genders than their birth sex would indicate at the time of the American frontier. So that was really cool.
That sounds truly fascinating, actually. Who was the author of that, Alex?
Peter oh gosh, hang on. What is his last name?
Sorry, mate, I put you on the spot in just the worst possible way.
No, I've got it. Hang on. Here we are. Peter Boag.
Peter Boag. Thank you. Yep. B-O-A-G. Okay,
yep.
I'm going to check that out. That sounds fascinating. Am I right in thinking that you studied Near Eastern languages and civilizations at Harvard?
Way back in the day, I did. Yeah, I studied biblical Hebrew, and then went on and got a master's in ancient Judaism.
Ah, fantastic. I mean,
very useful, incredibly lucrative. Highly recommend it. To hell with engineering. No,
of course, I know. A practical application of any degree material is a very, very positive thing. Oh, yeah. So I mean, do you have any kind of book ideas from that period of study? You know, it's because as Laura was telling me when we were talking, she thinks you have a very beautiful and lyrical style of writing, and I'm sure that your interest in and aptitude for language is an expression of that. And I just wondered if what your other plans were.
Yeah, when I first started writing fiction, I wrote a lot of short stories, and how I entered into, I've always been fascinated by retelling and how some stories kind of hang on to their meaning in different ages. So I did a lot of reimagining some of the biblical stories. For instance, the visit of Saul to the witch or so-called witch at Endor, where he brings back the shade of Samuel. I had a really fun time reworking that into a fictional story. Or Jonah. I had a good time doing that. I wrote an update of the story of David and Bathsheba with Uriah the Hittite, setting it in the Afghan war. So I've played with it. I've never written anything. Well, I've written stuff. It's never been published. That's novel length, reimagining that. But I have one. Actually just passed it to my agent for her to give a read to it. So we'll see if she likes it.
Oh, great. Fingers crossed. Yeah. That'd be awesome.
That sounds amazing. So I was just gonna, you mentioned before about that you're on the campus of was that the school that you used to attend?
Did Phillips Exeter? Yep.
Yeah. What's that like teaching there? being an ex-student?
It's interesting. So I graduated just about 25 years ago, and it's amazing how many of my former teachers and coaches are still here. So, you know, they have long careers. They love the place, which I think speaks well of the school. But it's a daily feeling of deja vu walking through the same hallways, which is both charming and bizarre. I mean, it's really, really strange. But I love teaching in general, and I love teaching here specifically. It's very student-centered. The kids are very eager and motivated. And then I live in a dormitory hall, which allows me to really get to know them and see a side of them that's more goofy at times, but also I think more fun and to engage with.
Oh yeah, that must be awesome. I have a recurring sort of a dream motif where I'm 2/3 of the dreams I have, I'm back at university in my hall of residence, and I think it was because it was such a happy and you know, learning based time in my life, and so to actually to actually be able to construct your career around those moments and marshal and help other human beings through that must be must be a very rewarding thing, I would imagine.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think adolescence is a time of great potential. It can be frustrating sometimes, both for them and for adults, but they're figuring out who they are, and there's no more meaningful sort of set of years to work with someone and mentor them than as they figure out, how do I live on my own? Who am I? How am I going to negotiate this world? So it's challenging, but it's really, really great. And I teach writing here, and I love to work with them as they, you know, maybe for the first time in their life, write a piece of fiction, and they're like, "Oh, that was fun." So it's good.
Yeah, I mean that is wonderful, and you also consult with school with regard to identity and gender inclusion, right? I mean, I guess that must be That must be a rewarding work also.
On a whole different level. Yeah, I came out as trans when I was at Phillips Exeter. So in 1995, between my third and fourth last year in high school, I came out, and they handled it well for 1995, but it was not easy. And since then, I've really tried to work with schools who are, you know, maybe have their first or one of their first trans students coming out, and just to say, what might your sports teams, what might your dormitories, even your class rosters look like, to try to get a name that they want to go by that isn't their legal name yet. And I even had a chance to do that in England. I worked with the American School in London on some gender inclusion as well.
Fantastic. We're sprinting towards the end of our time together. I know that Laura has at least one key question left for you here, Alex. So, Laura.
I do. So I read that you have a couple of cats. So I was just wondering, do they have suitably medieval names?
Kind of. The girl, that's a girl and a boy, and that we know. They haven't told us otherwise. It's fine if they're not. Stella.
Okay.
And the boy is Oberon.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We'll count it.
Yeah. Oberon's a fantastic name for many reasons, not the least of which is the Shakespeare fairy connection, but also features heavily within comic books. Oberon is a very, very key character in Jack Kirby's fourth World Saga. So there's a character called Mr. Miracle, and Oberon is his kind of manager assistant. Yeah. So,
cool.
So there we go. You know, it's covering all the bases.
Excellent.
Hey, Alex, thanks so much for joining us. Like I said, Laura's been talking about your book for quite some time, and I'm just very pleased to be able to have worked on this beautiful exclusive for Forbidden Planet with you, and you can order that from the links attached to this interview. It's really lovely to meet you, mate. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. A pleasure to meet you both. Thanks for the questions. And thank you for including the cats. They appreciate that.
Thank you. Take care. All the very best.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.